Well, hello there, how is everyone? I hope you're all well on this terrific Tuesday. That's it, baby, it's terrific Tuesday, and we survived a manic Monday. That made me think of the song, Just Another Manic Monday. God, that's showing my age, isn't it? Anyway, you look terrific, by the way. Terrific Tuesday, and you look terrific. You must be impervious to the trials and tribulations of Mondays. Well done. I am still suffering from man flu, which has been proven scientifically to exist, by the way. Go look it up. Man flu is a thing. It's a real thing. Anyway, I'm going to move swiftly along before I get tomatoes thrown at my head. And we're going to talk about the Idaho 4 case later on today in video 2 of a potential 3. Not going to promise anything. I'd rather under-promise and over-deliver than over-promise and under-deliver. So there's at least going to be 2. But this first one, we're going to speak about something in particular. And this is something that bugs the shit out of me. And it's when we talk about Bethany and Dylan and being survivors, and if we dare to try and talk about anything to do with the 8-hour delay, that dreaded phrase, I know, I'm not going to be talking about that specifically, but if we try and challenge it, what we're told is we're victim blaming, we're saying horrible things, it's disgusting that we're even approaching that topic, and we should be ashamed of ourselves and slap ourselves in the face with a kipper. And, you know, so I want to look at the crime itself. And were they genuinely lucky to survive? Were they genuinely lucky, which is possible? Were they genuinely lucky? And today we're going to work together in order to ascertain what really happened that night, or what we think happened based on what we know, to kind of make a decision on whether they were lucky or they were never in any real danger at all in the first place. And it just so happens that they were at a place where a terrible thing happened. And that in itself is terrible. I'm not taking anything away, because at the end of the day, if these people who lost their lives were indeed their close friends, you can imagine that that would be devastating. You know, I lost people, I lost somebody to a murder myself, and I've never got over it. And, you know, I'm 43 years young, and, you know, it's something that they will have to live with. But when we're told that we can't challenge things or question anything because we're victim blaming, that's when I get my arsehole a bit. And like I say, I've got some notes here. So look, was this simply a random attack? And what I mean by random is there was nothing really about it. It was just a case of going into a house and causing maximum damage. Someone who was fixated on a crime, they wanted to commit a crime, and they just picked a house randomly and thought, I'm going to go into this house and do this crime. And what would the crime have looked like had it have been completely random? And what would the thought process have had to have been? Look, we're kind of with Brian Koberger, where they're trying to push the fact that he'd gone over to this property around 12 times, or at least to the vicinity, and potentially he scoped the area out. And what I will say is, whoever did this, I believe that that is a high probability, is that they had been close to this property, they had done their work, they'd done their homework, or they were familiar to it through being inside it, being around it, whatever. But I don't feel that somebody went into this house completely blind without knowing what they would do and once they entered that house. But I've put here, random attack. What does a random attack look like? Random attack, I believe that everybody would have lost their lives in that house, because they would have gone into this house, this person, with the mindset of causing absolute maximum damage. I'm going to annihilate everybody in the house. Does the crime look like that? Does it look like the person just wanted to cause maximum damage? Like, we hear obviously of the injuries, and we hear about the fact that it was a horrible place to be, a horrible state. But we do have surviving housemates. And we do have a situation where it would seem that this person entered the property, they went past doors and headed upstairs with a purpose. With a purpose. Now, some people have pointed out, I saw a comment on another channel where they had turned around and said, look, I don't think this person did it alone, because if they'd have done it alone, they wouldn't have gone upstairs, because they'd have been pinned in and it would have placed them at risk. And I put it to you, and I'm surrounded by military. For those of you who have been around the channel a while, you know I live just off of a military base. I'm surrounded by military personnel, both US, UK, Navy, RAF. I'm right in the thick of it, and I speak to these people every day. And it's been sort of clarified with what I thought, and that is, look, if you was going to enter into an area, a building, you would generally clear the area that you're on, and then you would work your way up, and then you would come down to then you'd have a height advantage. So the idea is, from a height, you have the advantage rather than being pinned in down low. It's just the way it is from a military perspective. So if this person has got military training, they are military background, or they know, or they've looked into that, it's quite a high probability that they would have gone into this house and been able to, on their own, and to take control of the situation, they would have likely gone up and then down. But they would have likely cleared the area that they entered on, so they knew that when they come back down, that area was clear and they weren't going to get a surprise, which is likely what happened in this situation, which could have likely proven that this wasn't indeed Brent Kopacker, for instance. I know we have spoken about the possibility that Brent Kopacker was involved, but with his training, and with it being a random attack, say this was a random attack from a military background person, would they have cleared the first floor, gone up, come back down, and then either left because they knew that floor was clear, height advantage if they roused anybody below them, or would they have gone down, continued, and then back out? Who knows? But that's not how this crime went. So there was a little bit of an amateur, non-professional feel to it, if you like. But anyway, I digress. So we do have a question with regards to the person entering in this house, and we've touched on it, locks, doors being locked. Did they expect to go into this house and know that everybody's door would be unlocked or doors would be open? Or did they go into this house thinking everybody would still be awake, so they would just attack everybody not in their rooms, just out in the open, and then leave? That's something that we'll perhaps never know, but it is something you have to consider, because you have to consider how they would have dealt with things had the doors have been locked, had they have not had access into the individual bedrooms. What was their plan if they entered a house and was put up against a load of locked doors? Think about it. Let me know down below. So targeted attack. Someone's entered into this house because it is target. They have one or two targets specifically. In this case, we're kind of led to believe that Madison Mogen was indeed the target. People are alluding to the fact that there may have been an account under Brian Koberger's name that had been liking her pictures, so on and so forth. We will not know until the court whether that is indeed his account or not. The downside is when his name went public, everybody had access to his name, and that's when these accounts start to come up, materialise, and then you get lost in an abundance of them. So you don't know, and we won't know. Ann Taylor has alluded to the fact that there seems to be no connection between them. But again, there is a probability that is she just paraphrasing. I'm paraphrasing, and I'm trying to say she's saying that there isn't any connection that would point to him wanting to murder anybody in the house. He's done nothing out of the ordinary. She could be arguing that even what they've found is no different than you or I scrolling through Instagram or and liking random pictures. That doesn't prove an intent to kill. Who knows? But again, we don't know. We won't know until the courtrooms. But what I've put is, from what we know, this does indeed feel targeted due to the fact that if this was random, why enter the house and go past doors that he could have entered? Instead, he heads straight upstairs. Straight, it would appear, to Madison Mogen's room. Now, I've contemplated whether Kaylee was a target as well, because ultimately Kaylee didn't live there. She wasn't there. She was visiting, and people have questioned why on this specific night. Some people have turned around and said it's because the likelihood is that these kids have been out, they've been drinking, so they'd be easier to subdue. They might be passed out through copious amounts of alcohol, and maybe that's the best night to do it. But some have argued the other side of it and said, but there was so many cars out the front there. You could argue that this person wouldn't have known who was in this house, and being a party night, they could have entered that house and been met with 30 people. Who knows? The house was renowned for having parties. People even being there having parties, while the people who lived there weren't there. That is a fact. But we don't know whether the person who did this crime had that information at the point with which this happened. We don't know what they knew and what they didn't know. But look, we've got a bit of a curveball, and that is in the form of Xana and Ethan. Now, Xana and Ethan, we know, were downstairs. Now, what we've got to think is, if this was a random attack, again, we've spoken about the fact that everybody would have been a target. Everybody. They'd have just gone in there and killed everybody. So what happened with Ethan and Xana? Because you have to think, so did this person come into the house, go past Dylan's door, go up the stairs and do what they did upstairs, come back down, go past it again, and then head towards Xana and Ethan's? Because then, if that's the case, you have then got to consider that we had more than one target. Now, two people who didn't or shouldn't have been there, technically, would have been Ethan and would have been Kaylee. Ethan didn't live there. He was staying there purely because Xana was his other half, his girlfriend, and he'd stayed over. Kaylee, she didn't live there. She came over to see her best friend and show off her new vehicle. So you've got a situation where you've got Xana and you've got Maddie. Now, was it simply that these two were the targets? Or the alternative is that they heard something. They were roused, and they came out of the room. I have touched on this previously, and there is a point to it. There is a point to it. Because that, to me, seems the most logical explanation. But then you've got to think, so if he has come down the stairs, he must have seen from coming down the stairs, between that point of coming down the stairs and turning to leave, he has met somebody. He has either met Xana or he's met Ethan. And that would have been outside Dylan Mortenson's door. Now, the airmail documentation seems to allude to the fact that perhaps Dylan Mortenson actually came out of the room, didn't just open the door and peek round, but came out. And we know that there was a footprint, a latent footprint of a van's footprint. And I believe that someone has said about the size being around an 8 or a 7 or an 8, something like that. I don't know where they got that. I can't find that myself. Someone could probably point that out to me. But I can tell you now, Brian Koberger doesn't have a size 7 or 8 foot. Certainly not. And would he have been dressed in black, clad in black, ready to do this, and wearing a pair of Vans? I don't know. I'm not 100% sure. Not quite the right footwear for it, but what is the right footwear for it? But I would have at least think that if they're dressed in black, clad in black, masked up, they're probably wearing some kind of work boot, perhaps. Or even coveralls over their feet, something to protect their shoes so they can whip them off, if we're led to believe that this person had coverers all over them to protect them, and then they disrobed before leaving. Not sure if that happened, and I think that if you consider a few things about this case, I don't think the person disrobed inside the house. I can't see that being a thing because of this situation, the Xana and Ethan problem. And the Xana and Ethan problem is, you've got to look at it in two ways. Either there was multiple targets in this house, and if there was multiple targets in this house, then why were there multiple targets in the house? Why would it have been who it was? What was the connection that connected them all together? Or you go down the other route and you believe that the person came in, they went upstairs, they caused enough commotion to rouse Xana and Ethan, and that they came out, and there was then an altercation. And you know what I'm going to say next? If all this happened, and that is the way that played out, and we know now, or we believe we know now, is that Bethany and Dylan were messaging one another There was a conversation on their phones while this was happening, at the exact time this was happening. What were them calls or messages about? What was going on? And why didn't, if Dylan Mortensen had already stuck her head round the corner numerous times, why is it that when this was happening with Xana and Ethan, why didn't she stick her head out and see what was happening at that point? Because that commotion would have been more than the commotion that seemingly we're being led to believe was from upstairs on a different floor, playing with the dog, whimpering. Or was she hearing what was happening downstairs? Who knows? But my point being, I don't believe that Bethany and Dylan were ever in any real danger, because they never placed themselves in danger. They seemed to be messaging one another and stayed in their rooms, out of the way, while it was happening. And this person never, seemingly, was going to enter into any other rooms. They had come in, they were specifically targeting one person, and unfortunately, Xana and Ethan got caught in the situation because they likely heard what was going on and came out. And that's the only thing that makes me upset and angry with Dylan specifically, because I think that unless you want to believe that there is some targeted situation that targeted multiple people in that house, not just one, but multiple, because if you're looking at multiple targets, then you're not just looking at someone fixated with one female online, are you? You're not looking at someone who's fallen in love with Maddie and they want to, that sort of story. You're now looking at something that covers multiple people, and then the floodgates open then, don't it? Unless they've fallen in love with a load of them. That doesn't make sense. There is some other reason if you look at multiple targets. There's another reason, there's another purpose. It's not quite as simple. So you have to make a decision on what you believe was the motivation behind the crime. And if you believe it was infatuation of some description, then you're running with Maddie. You then put Xana and Ethan as collateral. And they were collateral because they heard something, they come out, and the rest is history. But you've still got two people who were communicating with one another while this was happening. They would have heard things. They would have heard enough to make you believe that 911 had to be called. So the question still remains, and will always remain, is why not just call for help? Why not call for help? I don't get it. And again, it's further promoted that this is how this went down by the fact that the car was seemingly speeding away from the site. They didn't drive away slowly. They drove away at pace, which would lead you to believe that whoever done it, if that car is indeed tied in and this is what happened, then, the adrenaline pump and being caught out by Xana and Ethan and having to, in effect, go into a situation that they were not planned for, that then made them leave in a hurry. Potentially why we saw a knife sheath being left there, potentially why the car was speeding away. But, again, it just doesn't make sense to me. So were they lucky to escape? Were they lucky? Was it luck? Or was it their own inactions or actions that saved them? But the question still remains, why not call 911? Why was it so long before 911 was called? And later on today, we're going to touch on 911 calls, because it was WSU Kim that came out and said that there was an earlier call, a 911 call at around 3 a.m. Is there any truth to it? And how would that have fitted into things? And could that have played a part in why we haven't heard the actual 911 call yet? Check out video 2 later, and I will see you all then.